The overwhelming desire to belong and fit in during our teenage years is something most of us can remember, no matter how long ago it was. It's a time of our life when we're so impressionable, vulnerable, impulsive, but also secretly craving security and acceptance from our friends and wider peer groups. If you're lucky enough to have formed lifelong connections during such a turbulent time, these friendships are a gift. But what happens when those around you not only take advantage of your desire to belong, but take the things to an unimaginable and sinister step? That's what happened to one young woman, and this is her story. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, and if you've never been here before, I'm Kimbyrleigha. It's nice to finally meet you. Today I have a fun, nostalgic, and delicious sponsor making this video possible, and I know all of you are going to want to try it if you haven't already. It's called Magic Spoon, and it's cereal, but it's not your kid cereal. It's for adults, but it's just as fun as eating cereal for breakfast when we were kids. It's all of the childhood classics with grown-up ingredients. It's high protein with no sugar. Every serving of a Magic Spoon cereal has 13 to 14 grams of protein, 0 grams of sugar, and 4 to 5 grams of net carbs, so you can feel good about what you're eating. I'm an 80s baby. I grew up throughout the 90s, and cereal was part of my everyday routine. I'd sit and read the back of the cereal box while waiting to go to school, or I would enjoy a big bowl of cereal on the weekend in front of my favorite TV show. But of course, as an adult, I wasn't eating cereal anymore because it wasn't the best choice until I found Magic Spoon. It tastes just like the cereal we all loved as kids. The most popular flavors are fruity, cocoa, frosted, and peanut butter. And there are so many more to enjoy, but with all the things adults care about, like being high protein, keto-friendly, gluten-free, and so much more. Plus, it actually tastes great. What initially drew me in were the colorful boxes with the fun designs. They even have games on the back like the old days, but for a mature kid at heart. But what kept me grabbing for another bowl was that Magic Spoon is an easy source of protein. It makes it so convenient for me to eat more protein when I am so busy and way too tired to cook, which is every day now that I have a newborn at home. I do not have much extra time right now, but with Magic Spoon, I can make and eat my breakfast with one hand while I'm holding baby Mazzy, and everything is so easy while still being high quality with no artificial ingredients. I'm on board, especially because I need something simple that will still give me the fuel to tackle my day. My favorite flavor right now is the cocoa one. It even makes my almond milk chocolatey, and there's also a cute dog on the box. I can't wait for you to try it. Just go to magicspoon.com and use the code Kimber, or click the link in my description box to try Magic Spoon cereal today and get $5 off. You can also find Magic Spoon in your nearest grocery store. And Magic Spoon is so confident in their product, it's backed by a 100% happiness guarantee online. So if you don't like it for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. So click the link in the description or go to magicspoon.com/Kimber for $5 off. Thanks so much to Magic Spoon for making today's video possible. Just a side note, our sponsors are more important than ever right now, so please consider supporting them. I don't know if other creators are talking about this, but there's definitely something happening on YouTube, and more specifically to two crime creators in regard to monetization. So I am very, very grateful to all of my sponsors. But now let's finally get into this case. I want to start today's story by introducing you to Adrianne Reynolds. Adrianne Lee Reynolds was born on September 12th, 1988 in the city of El Dorado in Union County, Arkansas. When Adrianne first came into the world, her birth mom, Carolyn, was only 16 years old and was no longer with Adrianne's father. So it was decided that it would be in Adrianne's best interest for Carolyn's mother, Beverly, and stepfather, Tony Reynolds, to adopt the newborn. So that is exactly what they did. And I think it's very honorable for Beverly and Tony to help Carolyn this way and take Adrianne in and raise her as their own child. It gave little Adrianne the stability she probably wouldn't have had at the time. Beverly and Tony truly considered Adrianne their own daughter. Unfortunately, when Adrianne was just 3 years old, Tony and Beverly decided to get a divorce. But the good news is that it was amicable, and they aimed to keep things as normal as possible for young Adrianne. Tony wasn't just going to step out of his adopted daughter's life. Even though they weren't blood related, they were still very close, and he was helping raise her, even though the marriage between him and Adrianne's maternal grandmother didn't last. Adrianne was an adorable kid with striking dark hair and eyes, and a lot of freckles across her cheeks. She was happy, bubbly, and talkative, and like so many other little girls, her favorite color was pink. Due to her petite size, Tony actually nicknamed her Little Bit. She absolutely loved riding in Tony's 1969 Ford Mustang. The two of them sang along to their favorite country music, and Adrianne loved telling Tony to make the car mad, which meant schooling the tires and burning rubber. Obviously, this was done in a safe way, and father and daughter both got a real kick out of it. They had a lot of fun together. They had such a close bond. And then when Adrianne was almost 6, Beverly moved her daughter Carolyn, Adrianne's 22-year-old birth mother, to Longview, Texas, where Beverly had grown up. But Tony was still in Adrianne's life. He saw her regularly. At this point, since Adrianne's birth mom was older, Adrianne actually went back into her care, and by now, she had another child. However, Beverly and Tony were still very involved in Adrianne's life. She grew into an outgoing, spirited, energetic young woman who had a lot of spunk about her. She was bubbly and curious, and despite having a tougher start to life than many of her peers, this didn't impact her innate drive to make new friends and to want to get to know people. During 5th grade, she met Carlene Warren, and the two of them became best friends for many years. By now, Adrianne also showed a talent for singing, and she was absolutely obsessed with the reality show American Idol, and her ultimate dream was to one day be on the show. So she spent hours practicing for her school talent shows so that maybe she could make it there. The very first song that she ever sang for her family was her favorite. It was Amazing Grace, and the rendition took their breath away. Singing was a feature of the Reynolds family get-togethers, and when the karaoke machine came out, everyone laughed and sang along as they passed around the microphone. They loved to share Adrianne's love for music and performing. Being a creative soul at heart, she also loved to sketch, and she harbored a dream of one day becoming a fashion designer or painting detailed pieces on cars. Adrianne's birth mother, Carolyn, eventually married a man named David Franco and began working at a convenience store as a manager. But as inevitably happens in many families, before Adrianne even hit her teen years, she began to clash with both her mom and David in a major way. By her 12th birthday, Adrianne was running with a rough crowd and she was skipping class at school. She'd actually fallen behind with her schoolwork, and she actually suffered a burst appendix at the time. She recovered from surgery, but things did not improve academically because, aside from the social aspect, Adrianne absolutely hated school. I know there were a lot of people out there like that. Let me know how you did when you were in elementary and high school. I know for me, I actually kind of liked it. But for poor Adrianne, Carolyn and David, they weren't around a lot to give her the care and the level of supervision that she required. Adrianne eventually spent a short time in rehab for getting into smoking pot, abusing alcohol, and even taking prescription drugs. She was willful and defiant, as so many kids are from troubled backgrounds can be, but she also began engaging in harmful behaviors like cutting and had sadly tried to take her own life as well. Things were obviously not looking very good for the preteen, and something had to change. Even living with different relatives locally did not seem to help her, nor did homeschooling, which Carolyn did try when Adrianne was in 8th grade. But soon, the Department of Family and Protective Services got involved. As I was researching for this case, I couldn't help but wonder if things would have been different if Adrianne would have stayed living with Beverly or Tony instead of going back with her birth mother. But ultimately, things got so bad that it was decided it would be better for Adrianne if she went back into the care of her adoptive father, Tony. But of course, so much had changed in Adrianne's life ever since she went back to live with Carolyn. However, Carolyn agreed that Adrianne would be better off away from the bad influences in Longview, Texas. By now, Tony had moved to East Moline in Rock Island County, Illinois, where he had grown up. He also got remarried, now to his high school sweetheart, a woman named Joanne. There was a bit of a back and forth when Adrianne first moved up to Illinois in October of 2003. She was only in East Moline for 8 months before she actually returned to Texas, because unfortunately, the kids in Illinois started to bully her for her strong Southern accent, and Adrianne wasn't one to back down and be picked on, so she stood up for herself. I've actually been following a current story right now of a 13-year-old girl named Aubrey Wyatt, and she took her own life recently due to apparently being bullied at school, which just blows my mind that kids can bully someone to death. It's very scary and it's heartbreaking. And for Adrianne, things were not stabilizing in Texas either. And despite wanting to stay there, 6 months later, in mid-November of 2004, 16-year-old Adrianne again made the move up north. This time, it was for good. She told her best friend Carlene that she didn't want to leave her friends and go back, but she had no other choice because Carolyn felt Adrianne would be safer in East Moline, and I feel so bad for all of the back and forth that this poor girl had to go through. The community Adrianne moved to was home to about 21,000 people. It's in a region known as the Quad Cities area, where the Mississippi and the Rock Rivers meet. The Quad Cities region includes Moline and Rock Island in West Illinois, and over the nearby border with Iowa. East Moline was a working-class, mid-sized city with a heavy focus on manufacturing, industry, and food processing as key to the local economy, like much of the Midwest. But it also had a family-oriented small community feel, where most people knew each other. It was safe, with a relatively low crime rate. This time when Adrianne moved back, Tony and Joanne decided to enroll her at a school called Black Hawk College Outreach Center. Now, though it has the word college in its name, it was actually for students of various ages and education levels, including high school. But this was not your typical mainstream high school, but a similar type of educational institution for students that were age 16 and over that were struggling to fit in at other schools for either behavioral or academic reasons. It's an alternative school, a place where these students had a second chance at finishing their high school diploma or earning their high school equivalency or GED and start to make their way in the world. It was a much smaller school with only about 80 students, so it definitely created a more close and nurturing environment compared to a larger school where students could feel that they were not included. It was for students who needed more support and who could easily feel like they were falling through the cracks. So this was perfect for Adrianne because we know she was being bullied, she wasn't fitting in, and she really needed the support. The change of scenery had given Adrianne a lot to consider. She knew that if she didn't buckle down and do well in school, this would stop her from her dream at the time. Her new dream was to join the U.S. Marines. To help her get serious about her future and start earning her own money, Adrianne also got a job as a clerk at a local fast food restaurant called Checkers. I don't know if you remember Checkers. We still have them here. I definitely remember them from my childhood. I love their French fries. Adrianne soon made friends with the entire staff, and she started feeling like she fit in. And she proved herself to be a very valuable employee, coming in early and staying there working late. That Christmas, Adrianne received something that many teens dream about having, her very own guitar, which she wanted to learn how to play so badly. It was black and it featured a striking design of red and orange flames all over the front of the instrument. Adrianne was in love with her guitar. She played it so much that one of the strings actually broke. And Tony and Joanne had planned on throwing Adrianne this huge graduation party when the time came. They were so proud of her, so proud of the progress that she was making and turning her life around. Now, because of the complex issues this teen had to deal with from her childhood, the family was actually in therapy, which was huge for everyone. Tony worked long hours as a truck driver and Joanne worked at the local grocery store, but the couple were totally committed to helping Adrianne turn things around and give her the stability that she so desperately needed. One of her favorite things to do was actually go with Tony down to the YMCA where he worked out. There was a dedicated space for teens to hang out, and Adrianne loved to sing while she was there. One of the most daunting experiences that we can encounter as a child, but even more so as a teenager, is actually moving cities and having to integrate into a new school. You want to meet new friends and you want to quickly fit in. And Adrianne was so far away from everything that was familiar to her. Not only did she have to focus on getting her grades back up so that she could graduate, but she was understandably worried about making new friends. She had gotten to know her adult stepbrothers, Joshua and Justin, and their families who lived with Tony and Joanne. But her biggest fear was remaining completely isolated socially from her peers. She desperately wanted to find her people so that she could settle into her new surroundings and feel accepted, which is something that many of us know is a big deal to teenagers. For a teen moving from the South to the Midwest, it was somewhat of a culture shock in a lot of ways, wanting to meet people but also feeling unsure of yourself. That's the way Adrianne felt. So she was pretty quiet when she first started at Black Hawk. But as she started to figure out the social hierarchy and the lay of the land, she began to style herself so that she would blend in. She didn't want to draw attention to herself with anything outrageous or alternative. The thing is, as soon as she opened her mouth, Adrianne stuck out because she had this Texan drawl. It gave away the fact that she was a newcomer, and this led other students to affectionately nickname her Tex or Texas. But at least they weren't making fun of her. She was also known as Pinky. Then, Adrianne couldn't believe her luck when one of the most popular girls at the school, if not the most rebellious, actually showed an interest in befriending the new girl from Texas. Having someone like that take you under their wing offers you an instant feeling of security and acceptance that so many teenagers crave, and so many struggle to find it. It reminds me of the movie Clueless, if you know, you know, when Cher takes an interest in the new girl Ty. She does this whole makeover on her, except this wasn't Beverly Hills, and these teens were a lot darker, I would say gothic even. The popular girl I'm talking about at Black Hawk was 16-year-old Sarah Kolb, and her style could be described as kind of grungy, kind of gothic, alternative. She definitely stood out in a crowd, and she wasn't only opinionated, but very confident, and she flaunted her attitude and her aesthetic. And many of the East Moline conservative parents found this very offensive. She wasn't the type of friend that you would be very excited to bring home to your parents. They would definitely be judging her because Sarah dressed in all black. She wore a lot of band t-shirts, combat boots, dark makeup, and she even had facial piercings. Sarah also didn't really care for authority figures. She was a fan of the Detroit rap and hip hop duo Insane Clown Posse. I know if you're my age, you probably know who they are. And she actually called herself a juggalo, or a juggalette. And this is a name for the group's fan base. The Juggalos' vibe and aesthetic was intended to appeal to people who felt like outsiders, always on the fringe and misunderstood, so that definitely describes Sarah and maybe even Adrianne. These were the kind of people who found a sense of identity in being part of the counterculture. There was definitely a distinct style to their look, with juggalos often painting their faces like clowns, getting multiple tattoos, piercings, wearing black baggy clothing, and even colored contact lenses with really weird designs on them. Sarah was the sort of person who would be kind and generous among her social circle. She was actually well liked by those she chose to befriend. Otherwise, anyone on the outside of her circle could actually kind of be afraid of her. For many of the kids at Black Hawk, her popularity was appealing. Sarah had the kind of magnetism and edge about her that attracted those who didn't necessarily want to follow the rules. And as a teen, isn't that everyone? Her dark sense of humor and the general vibe that she carried with her meant she was admired by a lot of the kids at Black Hawk who looked up to her as someone who was tough and cool. This can be a very attractive proposition for kids who are easily influenced or feeling lost or insecure. So many teens are yearning to belong, and they want a leader, someone to follow, to look up to. When Sarah approached Adrianne during a cigarette break at school, Adrianne was over the moon that not only did someone want to be her friend, but it was someone that everyone seemed to like. The most popular girl at school. Adrianne was impressed and flattered whenever Sarah brought her to lunch or gave her rides home because she had a car of her own, and Sarah also worked. She worked at a movie theater called Cinema 53 in nearby Davenport, so she would even get cheap tickets for her and Adrianne. And at this point, Adrianne felt like she had hit the friendship jackpot. Remember, these things matter to teens at the time. Many of them can't see past life in high school, and they tend to be emotionally immature, falling fast into friendships and relationships and making them their top priority. Things had been unstable in Adrianne's life for so long, but now she felt like she had a good friend who was always there for her. They became best friends really fast, and soon there was a hint of something more. And that's because Sarah was openly bisexual at the time, when it was still very much taboo for teens to be comfortable in their own skin this way. This is most likely what drew Sarah to Adrianne in the first place. She was attracted to Adrianne, even though Adrianne had always been straight. With all the attention that Sarah was giving her, she began to feel open about possibly exploring her sexuality. And in their letters to one another, the girls would discuss this topic and entertain the possibility of being more than just best friends. Now, I want to just mention that this sort of experimentation can be completely normal as part of adolescence, as teens who are learning who they are and who they want to be. And the two of them seemed to have a mutual attraction that only made them get closer and closer. The young women spent hours talking on the phone together, and Adrianne felt that she found her kindred spirit. Her confidence was growing under Sarah's influence, and Adrianne began expanding her social circle, meeting other students, including two guys, Matt Bitchell and James Kettering. She also made friends with another girl named Amber Earhart. But soon, Adrianne's family and friends noticed that she was changing. It started with the way that she was dressing. She was now emulating Sarah's style. She was dressing in black. She cut her hair. She was wearing that dark makeup and nail polish. She even changed her taste in music. Instead of listening to the latest pop and country, Adrianne was embracing heavy metal. There was one thing that Adrianne was told she was not permitted to do. She could change her style and she could change her music, but her parents did not want her getting any piercings. But much to Tony and Joanne's dismay, she disobeyed their rules. Adrianne came home with a DIY eyebrow piercing, courtesy of course, Sarah. Yes, she pierced it herself, and I'm like, ouch, because I had an eyebrow piercing as a teen and I got it done professionally and it still hurt. I can't imagine someone just sticking a safety pin into my face. But you know how teens are, if you try to stop them, they tend to rebel even more. So Tony and Joanne had to just let it go for now. As Adrianne's friendship group expanded through Sarah, she soon met 17-year-old fellow Blackhawk student Harley Quinn. Now, I know you're probably thinking, Harley Quinn, really? So at this point in the story, I want to explain something very quickly because I need to provide some context to avoid any confusion moving forward, because this can get confusing and that's the last thing I want for you. This is because this part relates to the future and evidence that will be very important later on in this case. Now, some of you might already be familiar with this case and the people involved, but I have to address this briefly for those that are not. Many years after Harley and Adrianne were first introduced, Harley commenced gender transition. While she was designated male at birth and went by a former name Corey Gregory, which does appear in court documents and much of the reporting on this case, she is a trans woman, and I will be referring to her today as Harley. But just understand that at the time that Adrianne met Harley, she had not transitioned. She was living as a male and going by her legal name, Corey. I hope that all makes sense. At the time, Harley lived back and forth between her parents Bert and Teresa and had originally attended Moline High School before transferring to Blackhawk at Sarah's urging. Sarah wanted Harley there with her. She originally met Sarah down at the North Park Mall in Davenport around early 2004, and they actually had a short romance. So they were a couple. It only lasted a few weeks. And by the time Sarah introduced Harley to Adrianne, Harley and Sarah were now just friends. They were pretty close. They were best friends, but they no longer had a romantic relationship. Sarah just wasn't feeling it. But Harley, on the other hand, was so enthralled by Sarah, she took whatever scraps her friend was offering if it meant that she could still be in her life. It's almost as though Harley wanted to be Sarah. She was that infatuated with her. Now, prior to Adrianne arriving at Blackhawk, Sarah and Harley were pretty much inseparable, whether they were at school or not. But Harley was a very different type of personality to Sarah. Whereas Sarah was brash and outspoken, Harley was more reserved, even compliant. It was a friendship where Sarah held all the power, which Harley didn't seem to mind. Harley's parents were very much aware of how this dynamic played out, how Harley followed Sarah around like a puppy dog, totally captivated, pretty much willing to do whatever Sarah wanted, which can be very concerning as a parent to know that another teen has so much power and influence on your child, even more so than their parents do. Along with their other friends, Sarah and Harley spent their spare time drinking and smoking pot. And soon, it was Sarah, Adrianne, and Harley. They were like the three musketeers. They were all best friends, and they were spending a lot of time together. But Sarah's general look and demeanor didn't endear her towards Tony and Joanne or instill in them any confidence that Adrianne was hanging out with someone who had her best interests at heart. The Reynolds first met Sarah when she came to pick Adrianne up for a party, and the family dog actually growled at Sarah. She was a stranger on their doorstep. So Joanne and Tony weren't exactly thrilled that Adrianne was hanging out with Sarah, but what could they do? They wanted her to be happy, and this was the friend group that chose her and that she chose to be with. Now, Sarah was known by other kids as someone that was prone to being very moody, who easily manipulated people. If she was upset with you, instead of just talking it out, no, she just let it marinate and stir and stir. And obviously, this is not a healthy approach to conflict resolution, especially during the teen years with everything that's so dialed up when it comes to relationships and everything just feels way more intense. Sarah's friends, on the other hand, typically knew her as someone whose bark was way worse than her bite. She was a show-off. She would threaten people all the time with her words if they dared to annoy her, but she would never follow through, so no one ever took her seriously. She was angry, sure, but she would issue these empty threats. It was just part of her reminding people who was in charge. One night in early December, Sarah actually invited Adrianne to join her and Harley at a place that's known as the Party House. It's located at the Fox Point Apartments on 7th Street in Rock Island. Now, this residence was rented by a group of young people, including Jane DeClercq, Corey Allison, Justin Morrow, and Brandon Cummings. The Party House was a place where anything goes. Teens would come to listen to music, to dance, to drink alcohol, to do drugs, and to hook up. I don't know. I think most of us has been to a house party before, so that's what you should picture in your mind. Typical house party. Adrianne was so excited to go. She had never been to a house party before, so this was a big deal. And it was also a big deal that Sarah extended this invitation to her. But the thing is, Sarah had something else on her mind, another reason that she wanted Adrianne to be there. She hadn't given up on the idea of actually becoming romantically involved with Adrianne, and she hoped that this could possibly take their friendship to another level. Maybe she could get Adrianne alone, they could go into one of the rooms at the house party, and things could progress from there, but that didn't happen. Adrianne was just so excited about making new friends at this party, especially with a guy named Corey. She was flirting pretty hard with him, and by the end of the night, she ended up going down to the basement with him, not Sarah. Everyone who knew Sarah knew that she had set Adrianne up, that it was some kind of like twisted test to see whether she was really interested in exploring things with Sarah or not. And she couldn't believe how quickly Adrianne just went and hooked up with this guy. Sarah decided that she didn't want to pursue anything with a girl who was so quick to engage in casual sex, even though, quite frankly, it's none of Sarah's business who Adrianne decided to sleep with or do anything with because they were not a couple. Adrianne was free to do as she pleased. But Sarah was infuriated when she learned that Adrianne had been intimate with Corey. In Sarah's mind, she'd done Adrianne a huge favor by inviting her to this party, letting her hang out with her friends. And now she was just off sleeping with some guy she just met. Usually your friends would be really supportive of you in this situation, but not if they have feelings for you. It becomes a lot of jealousy. Sarah felt that Adrianne was not only ungrateful, but not the kind of girl she wanted to explore a relationship with, maybe not even be friends with. Sarah clearly only wanted one thing. She wanted to get what she wanted, whatever that was at the time, and she wanted Adrianne. So of course, the rejection did not sit well with her. Now, Adrianne took Sarah's completely unjustified overreaction as a sign that maybe it was better to make other friends. By now, Adrianne was much more confident and comfortable with who she was than she had been when she first started at Blackhawk. And at heart, she was a gregarious, social young woman. So she thought, why not expand my social circle? Adrianne didn't want to have to rely on just one person to be close friends with, especially someone with intentions that she wasn't on board with. And there were plenty of boys that were very interested in dating Adrianne. And there were just more and more people that wanted to hang out with Adrianne. And for any teenage girl, the high of being popular can be intoxicating. And now feeling braver than ever, Adrianne returned to the party house by herself in the following days. She knew that her friend Justin was going to be there, and she had been getting to know him. But that night, someone else turned up that Adrianne didn't expect, Sarah, with Harley in tow. And when she saw Adrianne, she was absolutely furious. She felt like Adrianne was flaunting the fact that she didn't need Sarah anymore. And Sarah began yelling and cursing and getting right in Adrianne's face, embarrassing her in front of everyone. And much to Adrianne's shock, I did not believe that this happened when I read it. Sarah pulled out a knife. And she told Adrianne to get the hell out of the house and stay away from her friends, even calling Adrianne a slut and a whore. Adrianne's fear soon turned to confusion. She didn't understand why Sarah was doing this. She could tell that she was clearly jealous, but this was an extreme. Adrianne was shocked by Sarah's aggressive outburst that she burst into tears and ran down to the basement. After this outburst, Sarah just turned around and promptly left, infuriated. And that's when she called her friend Amber, ranting about Adrianne and how she felt publicly disrespected. Amber was concerned about how unhinged Sarah actually sounded. telling Sarah that maybe it was best that her and Adrianne just kind of cool off, that they're not in the same place at the same time, at least for that night. Following this party, Adrianne told Andrew that Sarah had threatened her with a knife in front of everyone, and still, Adrianne was intent on spending more time with Justin. It wasn't going to scare her away from doing what she wanted. And a few days later, she returned to the party house once again. And one thing led to another, and her and Justin ended up hooking up. Again, Sarah turned up there, and she was not happy. It was as though she was going there just to catch Adrianne doing something that she didn't agree with, kind of like a stalker ex. And they hadn't even been in a serious relationship. Again, Sarah pulled a knife out, threatening Adrianne by telling her not to F with her. Thankfully, things did not escalate further, and Justin took Adrianne home. Now, despite how aggressive and threatening Sarah had been, Adrianne was so kind-hearted and forgiving that she still wanted to be friends with Sarah if she would take her back. Of course, she was hurt by Sarah's possessive behavior. She couldn't see why everyone couldn't just get along together and be happy, and there'd be a happy medium instead of all this all for nothing. But that is how Sarah was and what she thrived on. Adrianne was a good person, and she wanted to believe that underneath Sarah's bravado and all of her harmful words and actions, she was still the girl that she had first met, who showed her the ropes at Black Hawk and took her under her wing. She had been her first friend, the first person to make her feel welcome. So Adrianne took a different approach and decided to show Sarah kindness. It's like that saying, you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Adrianne thought surely this would break through Sarah's tough exterior and things would just go back to the way they used to be. If they could only just have an honest conversation, things could work out. Adrianne then began writing Sarah letter after letter and coming by her house multiple times a day. But this strategy had the opposite effect. Sarah made it clear she didn't want to be friends with Adrianne anymore. She told her she actually hated her and took to bad-mouthing her all over the entire school. It's like if she couldn't have her obsessing over her and only her and devoted to her, then Adrianne couldn't have any friends. And Sarah was going to make sure of that. She wanted her to go away and leave her alone, just disappear. Now, the lack of response from Sarah sent Adrianne into a spiral, and she began self-harming again. On the front of one of the notes to Sarah, she begged her to read it, saying she couldn't change what was in the past, but she swore that she could change now. Adrianne then began showing up at the movie theater where Sarah worked, and even had other people go in the theater to try to talk to Sarah for her. Adrianne was obviously desperate to make things work, and for Sarah to stop bad-mouthing her. She was hoping to convince Sarah that they could still be friends. And I really think this must have stemmed more out of not wanting Sarah to continue doing the bullying and the bad-mouthing than it did with her really wanting to be friends with her. But she was a very compassionate and kind-hearted person. However, on the other hand, Adrianne still very much wanted to genuinely connect with other people her age, and she wasn't going to give up on her new friendships either. She knew that when she was friends with Sarah, it seemed like all of her time was monopolized by that one person, and she didn't want that no matter who it was. She also realized that true friendship wasn't meant to be abusive and turbulent, and it wasn't her problem if Sarah was jealous. So Adrianne bravely wrote Sarah a long letter saying she would not tolerate her bullying, and she called her out on her toxic behavior. Adrianne wrote it was a mistake for her to have slept with the boys at the house party, but she wasn't going to accept the way that Sarah was treating her regardless. As part of exploring her new friendships, by January of 2005, Adrianne was now spending a lot more time with the third person, and that was Harley. Remember, the three of them used to be so close? But of course, that was when Sarah was there. She was the common theme between them. However, over time, Harley was getting sick of the way Sarah treated her as well. Adrianne's gentle, easygoing personality was a refreshing change from Sarah's intensity and abrasiveness, and Adrianne realized that Sarah had a sense of ownership over Harley, who Adrianne felt had been reluctant to push back against Sarah's dominance, so she felt bad for Harley. So Adrianne and Harley began writing cute notes to one another, kind of how, Sarah and Adrianne used to do with one another. Adrianne sent one saying that she actually loved Harley because she was respectful, cute, nice, and honest. Adrianne felt that Harley was one of the sweetest people she had ever met, which opened up Adrianne to trust her more. The pair spoke for hours on the phone, and by mid-January, they were hanging out together without Sarah all the time. I'm sure you can guess that Sarah would not be happy about this. And it wasn't exactly a secret either. Adrianne didn't feel like she should sneak around to spend time with Harley, but when Sarah found out, she was actually mad at Harley. Instead of doing what she did to Adrianne, Sarah was more open to reconciling with her longtime friend and ex, Harley. But of course, she was way easier to manipulate as well. But there wasn't any forgiveness for Adrianne. Of course, we know that even as adults, within tight friendship groups, people can spend time one-on-one or just with a few people without everyone trying to be included in every get-together. Not only is it impossible in terms of logistics with all of our busy lives, but it's important to nurture friendships in this way. In adolescence, though, and in your teens, the idea that not everyone is automatically included in everything can cultivate a sense of insecurity and exclusion that causes conflict. And it can also feel like a deep sense of rejection. Adrianne knew she didn't need Sarah's permission to hang out with Harley, but she also knew that Sarah was too emotionally immature to understand that or accept it. Sarah lived in a black and white world where if you weren't with her or for her, then you were against her. Sarah openly continued disrespecting Adrianne to other people. She spread really nasty rumors about her that were not true, threatened other kids not to hang out with her, and made Adrianne incredibly distressed by telling her she should actually take her own life. Sarah even gave her a really nasty nickname, Jiffy, after the peanut butter brand. This is a term that Sarah used for girls who engaged in casual sex, saying that they spread their legs as easy as peanut butter spreads on bread. It's so childish, but for a teen, it would be considered very hurtful. Adrianne finally confided in Joanne that Sarah's bullying scared her. But still, she was willing to do anything to repair their friendship. She couldn't understand why Sarah was so toxic. She pleaded with her in one letter, wanting to know why she hated Adrianne so much and wanted her to die. There's something special I want to start doing in these videos, and I'm starting it now. And going forward, I want to do these short recaps to keep everyone up to speed on the facts. I know that so many of you are watching while you're cleaning or driving or at work, and at times things can get so confusing. So I'm going to offer a short little recap for you on screen with a graphic and also telling you what's going on so you can get back on track in case you miss anything. You'll know in every video that a recap is coming, so you can rest assured if you miss anything, I will make it make sense for you. Let me know if these recaps are helpful. I'm also going to include a chapter marker here so you'll know where the recap is and where it ends if you'd rather skip it. So here we go. Now for this recap, 16-year-old Adrianne had a turbulent upbringing. Her birth mother, Carolyn, was only 16 when she had her, so she was raised by her maternal grandma, Beverly, and her step-granddad, Tony, until they got divorced. Then she eventually went back to live with her birth mother when she was in the first grade. But this ultimately didn't work out, and Adrianne began rebelling as she got older, eventually getting into a tough crowd at 12 years old and even getting into drugs. So she was sent back to live with Tony and his new wife, Joanne, out in Illinois, and was enrolled in an alternative high school called Black Hawk, where she hoped to make new friends. The most popular girl at the school, Sarah Kolb, who was openly bisexual, showed an interest in Adrianne and took her under her wing. They became best friends at first and hung out with Sarah's ex, Harley. They were all very close until Sarah began to want more from Adrianne, romantically. And even though Adrianne entertained the possibility of the two girls being more than friends, Adrianne ultimately found her own footing and began branching out, even deciding to get close to two guys, Corey and later Justin, who she ended up hooking up with. This infuriated Sarah, who felt rejected. So she started a hate campaign against Adrianne at Black Hawk School, trying to ruin her reputation, even pulling a knife on her several times, threatening her and calling her names, trying to turn every student against her. But those who knew Sarah said she was all talk and only trying to look dangerous, but she wasn't. Even though all of this had happened, kind-hearted Adrianne still wanted to reconcile with Sarah, but no matter how hard she tried, Sarah would not forgive her. Eventually, Adrianne began spending more time with Harley without Sarah, and of course, when the two of them became close, it made Sarah even more angry. She ended up forgiving Harley, but not Adrianne, who even confided in her guardian, Joanne, that she was scared of Sarah, and she didn't understand why Sarah said things like how she hated Adrianne and hoped she would take her own life. So now you are up to date on everything that went on, in case you missed anything. Now that the recap is over, let's go back to the story. On Friday, January 21st, 2005, Joanne woke Adrianne up and she headed off to school as usual. She got a ride by her stepbrother, Justin. She said goodnight to Tony the night before because he had to be up really early at 4 a.m. for work. Adrianne had a 5 p.m. shift that afternoon at Checkers after school, so she was planning on coming home to change and then heading out to work. Later that afternoon, Tony and Joanne were at home, and they noticed that Adrianne's work uniform was still in her bedroom, and that was odd. She should have been at work by then. and there were no other clothes or belongings indicating that Adrianne had come home and headed back out again. When Joanne called around to see if anyone had seen Adrianne, no one had. So the couple got in their car and drove up to Checkers, where they learned that Adrianne did not show up for her shift, nor did she pick up her paycheck. At first, Tony was irritated, and rightfully so. He thought this was really irresponsible of his daughter, but he also wondered, had something happened that made her run off? As the hours passed, Tony and Joanne had this growing sense that something was really wrong. They frantically made phone calls to everyone they could think of, leaving multiple voice messages for everyone who knew Adrianne. She was only 16 years old. She was still so young and so vulnerable. Now, Joanne and Tony had Harley's number along with other friends, including Sarah. And when they talked to Sarah, she said she hadn't seen Adrianne since she and Harley dropped her off earlier that day at the McDonald's on 727 Avenue when they got out of school. Now, Sarah did mention that the two of them did have an argument, so she drove off with Harley, leaving Adrianne behind. When Joanne and Tony talked to Harley, she gave them the exact same story. By 7:30 p.m., Tony and Joanne's concerns had grown even more. They drove around the town looking for Adrianne, including going over to Harley's house, but there was no sign of her. If Adrianne was with a friend, why didn't she reach out to them? She couldn't drive, and she didn't have a cell phone because she actually knew how much she talked, so she couldn't afford it because back then you used to have to pay for minutes. So where was she? They knew Adrianne had never run away. As troubled as she had been, that just wasn't something she would have ever done. By 8 p.m., the Reynolds reported her missing to the East Moline Police Department. Tony called Adrianne's birth mother, Carolyn, down in Texas to let her know that Adrianne was gone. And without hesitation, Carolyn began making plans to jump in her car and make a 12-hour trip to Illinois. That same night, Officer Josh Allen from East Moline Police Department called Sarah to see if she knew anything about what happened to Adrianne. She explained that after leaving school at lunchtime, she, Harley, and Sarah's new boyfriend, 16-year-old Sean McKittrick, had given Adrianne a ride. They dropped her off at McDonald's between about 12:30 and 1 p.m. It was the one across the street from Adrianne's house. So Sarah explained Adrianne didn't want to be taken home because she didn't want her parents to see her in a car with a boy. Now remember that Harley had not transitioned at this stage, so that's what this comment was in reference to. It was in reference to Adrianne being in the car with Harley, who was Corey at the time. Sarah added that Adrianne was wearing a bright orange hoodie and blue jeans. She made it clear that the pair were no longer friends, saying that she actually hated Adrianne because she felt she was promiscuous. Sarah admitted that the girls had an argument at school and that Sarah wanted to sort things out, so she gave Adrianne a ride home so that they could talk. But after talking, they still would not see eye to eye. Sarah said she had no idea what happened to Adrianne, but she did express concern that maybe she ran away from home. But she didn't explain why she would think that. Sarah gave the names of other people who knew Adrianne so they could question them, but then she had a kind of odd question for police. She wanted to know, given she was the last person to see Adrianne, did this mean that there was going to be a warrant out for Sarah's arrest? I understand you're 16, you don't really know how the law works, but Officer Allen assured her that that wouldn't be the case unless she was holding Adrianne captive or preventing the police from locating her. So Sarah told Officer Allen that she'd appreciate if they would let her know if they found her friend or her former friend. The Reynolds were distributing hundreds of flyers all around town, especially to motorists at fast food restaurants. Tony kept driving around looking for Adrianne, circling back to the party house at Fox Point Apartments, and even peering into every car he passed. The story of Adrianne's disappearance soon made news headlines, and everyone in East Moline knew about the missing teen. It was all hands on deck, and as a matter of fact, a lot of agencies and officers were working on this case. Illinois State Police Special Agent Sergeant Mike Shekel led this investigation. He was assisted by Sergeant Mike Britt, East Moline Police Chief Victor Moreno, Captain Bob Fuller, Detective Sergeant Brian Foltz, Rock Island Police Captain John Wright, and Sergeant Tim Steins, and the Quad City Metropolitan Enforcement Group. As I said, a lot of hands on deck. Now, while all this is going on, Tony and Joanne thought that something was off about Sarah's claim as to why she didn't just drop Adrianne directly at home. Plus, recall that Adrianne confided in Joanne that she was fearful of Sarah, and there was no way anyone would have even seen her in a car with a boy because Tony and Joanne were at work, so it didn't make any sense. Adrianne knew they were at work. She knew no one would see her with a boy. The following night, on Saturday, January 22nd, East Moline police officer Kevin Johnson checked in with Sarah at work to see if she had heard anything. She said she hadn't, but she said she would let them know if she did. Officer Johnson also wanted to follow up on what Sarah originally told them because Harley had a slightly different account. Harley had told law enforcement that she didn't know what Sarah and Adrianne had been arguing about. As far as she knew, the two girls had made up before Adrianne got out of the car. It's a little bit of a different story. Remember, Sarah said they still didn't see eye to eye? But Sarah now told the officers that they initially drove to Taco Bell and things got physical in the vehicle when Sarah accused Adrianne of being promiscuous. Sarah admitted that she hit Adrianne and then Adrianne fought back. And then Sarah's boyfriend Sean got out of the car and took off during the argument. That's when they drove to McDonald's near Adrianne's house. The girls then apologized to each other, and even though they still weren't friends, there was no longer any bad blood. Sarah then dropped Adrianne off, and that was it. Sarah explained that the information Harley had given police was so different because she actually told Harley not to say anything, not to alert them to the altercation because she didn't want to raise any concerns, but also wanted to tell the truth. So that's why she came clean that she and Adrianne were not really friends, but that everything was cool at the end of the drive. In the absence of any news, the Reynolds felt helpless. Joanne was so desperate she actually called a psychic for advice, but this didn't offer any insight either, but maybe at least a little hope. Since the psychic told Joanne Adrianne was still alive and in someone's basement. So of course, I can only imagine holding on to any hope that you can. Now, one day after her disappearance, Adrianne had plans to babysit for her coworker, John Beauchamp, on that Saturday night, but she never showed up, even though everyone was hoping that she would. It wasn't like her to disregard her responsibilities. But then, with the town being as small as it was, police started hearing rumors from the local teens. The students at Black Hawk, including Adrianne's friends, wondered if something terrible had happened to her. Had Adrianne been the target of violence? It sounded too horrible to be true, but if she'd been beaten up and left somewhere to fend for herself, she could be in real trouble. Was she lying somewhere injured, they wondered. Considering it was in the middle of winter at the time, it was freezing. The overnight temperatures got down to 8 degrees. Everyone also knew about the drama between Adrianne and Sarah. She'd been intertwined in Adrianne's life like no one else. But Sarah was adamant. She told Tony she hadn't seen or heard from Adrianne since Friday afternoon, and neither had Harley. And that's what both of them kept telling police who were checking in with them over the weekend. Tony was no longer mad at Adrianne for not coming home or contacting them. Like Joanne, he was now really scared and he just wanted Adrianne to come home. In the meantime, a couple named Vernon and Connie Bennett, who were having lunch at Taco Bell on the day in question, had contacted police. The couple noticed a red vehicle in the parking lot at the time, and they told police that it looked like a fight was happening in the backseat of that car. They said they saw a young woman sitting in the passenger side that fit Adrianne's description. Even though Adrianne was not missing at this point, Vernon was so concerned about this fight that he took down the model of the car, and then he passed his information on to his wife when she saw a picture of Adrianne in the newspaper several days later. But we do know that Sarah already admitted that there was a physical altercation that happened between her and Adrianne. So what happened after the fight? That's what investigators wanted to know. Police knew that if anyone had any information, significant or not, about how things were going for Adrianne in the lead up to her disappearance or afterward, it would be her friends at school at Black Hawk. Amber told police that just before Adrianne went missing, Sarah had called to ask for ideas about where she and Adrianne could chat undisturbed. Okay, that adds up because we know that Sarah told investigators that her and Adrianne were trying to discuss their issues. Another student, James Kettering, told law enforcement that Sarah told him she was angry with Adrianne and was actually going to beat her up. Now, that's a different story. He said that Sarah had actually invited him to lunch on the day that Adrianne disappeared, but he declined because he had other plans. So in response, Sarah said she was going to have fun. This makes it appear that Sarah had cruel intentions from the beginning, and that she didn't merely want to chat with Adrianne, but instead, she was going to harm her. And now she's missing. So that's a red flag. By Monday, January 24th, with Adrianne still missing, a whole weekend had now passed, and Sarah and her mom, Catherine, showed up with their attorney, Bob Riley, at the police department. They were there to give Sarah's account of what had happened so everything could be squared away. What investigators wanted was more information about what Sarah did after leaving Adrianne behind. Sarah told Detective Foltz that after she dropped Adrianne off, she and Harley went back to Sarah's place, where she changed her outfit and then went to her grandparents for her grandmother's birthday. She told them that Adrianne was perfectly fine when she got out of that car. But Sarah refused to corroborate this with a polygraph test. Now, granted, they're not reliable, we've heard a million times, and they can also be used to intimidate witnesses. Now, Harley's mom, Teresa, she got word that Sarah had an attorney, and she was pretty surprised when Harley said that maybe she should get one. The reason why, Harley explained, was because police had been asking her and Sarah a bunch of questions. And remember, they're minors, so that is a big deal, and they should have counsel to guide them. As a matter of fact, law enforcement had even searched Sarah's red 1991 Geo Prism, but they didn't notice anything of concern other than maybe the trunk smelling a little bit like gasoline, and there were some lighters in the car. Teresa thought getting an attorney for Harley was kind of a weird request, especially because she said, if you didn't do anything wrong, why do you need to worry about it? But Harley still seemed worried. So her dad, Bert, arranged legal representation so that Harley could feel more comfortable speaking with police, which for any young person could be very intimidating. So I think that's the right move for anyone that's being interviewed by police. Later that day, Harley, her attorney, and Bert showed up at the East Moline Police Department. Harley answered Sergeant Shekel and Detective Foltz questions, and everyone seemed satisfied that she told law enforcement everything she knew, even though she too refused to sit for a polygraph. But the next day, on Tuesday, January 25th, Harley's family could see that she was in deep emotional turmoil. In the days since Adrianne had gone missing, she was weepy and emotional, and she couldn't even sleep. Of course, everyone was worried about Adrianne, but Harley's dad, Bert, knew that this behavior was beyond the normal level of concern. So he confronted her. Bert asked Harley, "What is going on?" And that is when she caved. She said that something terrible had happened to Adrianne, and now Harley wanted to talk to the police again, which she explained was why she wanted a lawyer in the first place. At the same time, State Police Special Agents Chad Broderson and Chris Endress were in the process of organizing a search of a 160-acre farm belonging to Brian and Mary Engel, who just happened to be Sarah's grandparents. Now, this farm was situated in Millersburg near Aledo in a rural part of Mercer County. Now, this is about a 46-minute drive from East Moline, and the reason why they were going out there was because Sarah's grandfather, Brian, had told the officers that after 6 p.m. on Friday, January 21st, there was a strange vehicle driving around without headlights on an isolated part of his property. So Brian drove out to see who was in the car, and then he realized it was actually his granddaughter, Sarah, and Harley. Sarah told her granddad that she was just showing Harley around the farm, but Brian knew she would have had to go off-road to get where she was, which was difficult in her Geo Prism, so that seemed suspicious, but not as suspicious as when he later found out that Adrianne had gone missing. Later that Friday evening, Sarah drove to her grandparents' house like she said she did, while Harley waited outside. Brian thought Sarah was behaving strangely, mostly because she hugged him several times and told him she loved him, which was not like her. It was also weird that Sarah went to the farm with a friend and not her mom, because she never had gone out to that farm without her mom, Catherine. Back at the East Moline Police Department, Harley told Sergeant Shekel and Detective Foltz that on January 21st, Adrianne took up Sarah's offer of a ride home from school. In the car were Harley, Sarah, Adrianne, and Sean. They all left the school in Sarah's car and drove to that local Taco Bell to get some lunch, which was only down the street about a 5-minute drive away from Blackhawk. Adrianne was in the front passenger seat, Sarah was driving, and according to Harley, she and Sean were in the back. Sarah said that she knew that Adrianne and Harley had been making out when they hung out together 2 days prior on the night of January 19th. This was true, and it somehow got back to Sarah, and no one knew how. But she was mad. Sarah also learned that Adrianne had asked Harley out, meaning she wanted to be more than friends. But remember, Adrianne was interested in boys, but in the context of our story, Harley hadn't transitioned at this time. And even though Sarah was already dating Sean at the time, she was furious that Adrianne would pursue her ex. And evidently, Adrianne had also commented that Sean was hot when Sarah asked Adrianne what she thought of him. This seems pretty petty, but as teenagers, the discussion soon became heated. And by the time they pulled into that parking lot, things escalated. According to Harley, Sarah lashed out at Adrianne, hitting her, cursing at her, and calling her names. And then she grabbed Adrianne's head, forcing her to turn around and look into the backseat at both Harley and Sean. And Sarah demanded that Adrianne stay away from both of them. Harley said that while all this is going on, she was sitting in the backseat and she didn't want to intervene, even as people were walking past. She said that at least 10 people had walked by. But from her perspective, she felt that Sarah and Adrianne just needed to fight it out. And trying to break up the physical altercation wouldn't have diffused the tension. Harley said she just sat, looked out the window, and smoked a cigarette. But Sean didn't like what was going on, and he told Sarah to stop. But she snapped back at him that if he didn't like what was happening, then he should leave. So he did. He got out of the car and he walked back to school. Harley explained that at this point, the two girls in the front seat were continuing to struggle, with Adrianne trying as hard as she could to defend herself from Sarah's attack. But when Adrianne struck Sarah in the nose, this was a turning point, and things were about to get much worse. Apparently, according to Harley, of course, Sarah grabbed a long wooden stick that she kept in the car and used as a weapon, and she began beating Adrianne with it. Now, just to give you a little idea of what Sarah was like, this stick was a handle of a hammer or an axe, but Sarah actually referred to it as something very offensive. She used the N-word in reference to it being used to beat off people that she called the N-word. Not cool. Disgusting. As the struggle continued, the girls ended up in the backseat with Harley, who jumped out of the car and got into the front passenger side to get out of the way. And I'm sitting here thinking, why didn't Harley intervene? I mean, this seemed to be an extreme attack, but according to Harley, it was now when she decided things had to stop. But instead of going to help Adrianne, Harley jumped on her, pinning Adrianne's arms down and restraining her. What? I was so surprised when I read that. And then she said before she knew it, Sarah was actually strangling Adrianne in the back seat. And you'd think that Harley would do everything she could to stop Sarah, but instead, she apparently pulled out a belt and placed it around Adrianne's neck. I cannot even begin to imagine the sheer panic and horror that was going on in Adrianne's mind at this point. Not because of just the attack by Sarah, but the realization that Harley, someone that Adrianne thought was a friend and she trusted, had betrayed her. She was helping Sarah do something so awful and so frightening, and everything crystallized in that very moment for Adrianne. She knew where Harley's true loyalties were. Harley later said, very arrogantly, about her actions, that she would always be on Sarah's side, which is just so unbelievably chilling, and it disgusts me. Harley was adamant that things just got out of control, and she claims she had no idea about Sarah's intentions when she got in that car that afternoon. But then they just got to a point of no return, and she found herself just following Sarah's lead. Then Harley stated that she and Sarah initially thought that Adrianne was just unconscious, not dead. But then, when they realized what they had done, Sarah started to panic. Harley said she realized Adrianne was dead because her face and her lips were blue. What did you think was going to happen if you deprive someone of oxygen? Harley explained that she and Sarah sat and worked out what they were going to do next while just smoking a cigarette. How cold and callous can these people be? Sarah then told Harley she needed help disposing of Adrianne's body. So they drove to Sarah's place and they got a 2-gallon can of gasoline, a blue tarp, and a long forked gardening tool from the garage, throwing them into the car. Harley continued telling the police that she and Sarah drove to Sarah's grandparents' farm, and that is when they wrapped Adrianne's body in the blue tarp, dragged it away from where it would be visible. Then Sarah grabbed the can of gasoline, poured it all over Adrianne's body, and using a butane lighter, she set her remains on fire to get rid of all the evidence. This is so stomach-churning to contemplate, an extremely callous thing for anyone to do, let alone 2 teenagers. And Harley told officers that she and Sarah went and sat in the car and listened to music to pass the time. That is unbelievable while a person is burning right outside of that car. They weren't even worried that someone would catch them in that moment. And as the time passed and the fire dwindled, they soon realized that Adrianne's remains were not just disintegrating in the flames like they thought they would. This is when Harley told police that she and Sarah drove into town and went to Sarah's grandmother's antique store called Treasure Hunt to again pass some time. Then they went and got more gasoline and went back to the farm And that's when they ran into Sarah's grandpa, who was mad that they were on his property. After they were done speaking with her grandpa, Harley said Sarah poured the rest of the gasoline on Adrianne's remains, but this did not speed up the process. Sarah thought Adrianne's body would just burn into a pile of ashes and there would be no trace of her. She would just disappear like she never existed. But now they had to figure out what to do next, which wasn't part of their plan. And I have to tell you, what I'm about to say is deeply disturbing. But Harley told police that now desperate, Sarah instructed Harley that she was going to have to dismember Adrianne's body, and Harley flat out refused to do that. But it was already dark by that time anyway. So what they did is they just concealed Adrianne's body with a bunch of branches, and they went back into town. Then Harley said that on Sunday, January 23rd, Sarah drove them back to her grandparents' farm where they smoked some pot before Harley said that Sarah dismembered Adrianne's body. Wow. And Harley explained that Sarah removed both Adrianne's arms and her head and then placed them in a black trash bag. They then concealed the rest of Adrianne's remains on the farm. At this point, they headed back to East Moline, and Harley said Sarah drove them to Black Hawk State Historical Site, which we're going to refer to as the park because that's how it's referred to by the locals. This is a 208-acre piece of land in Rock Island County that runs along the Rock River. Sarah led Harley down a hill where they found a covered manhole not too far from the water's edge. Sarah allegedly dumped the trash bags containing Adrianne's head and arms into that hole and covered it back up, placing leaves and sticks on top so it did not appear to be disturbed. Honestly, I cannot even believe that this even happened, but it gets crazier, I kid you not. Harley said that the reason she'd been so distressed in the weekend leading up to her confession was not because she was upset about what happened to poor Adrianne, but because, wait for it, she was worried about losing Sarah. Yes, that is correct. Losing Sarah. How can anyone have so much hold on another person? It is beyond me. According to Harley, Sarah was solely responsible for everything that happened, but I think most of us would probably beg to differ. But okay, with this new information from Harley, she agreed to take law enforcement to the park and show them where Adrianne's remains had been disposed of. Around 11 p.m. that Tuesday night, Harley guided officers, including Sergeant Shekel, Detective Foltz, and Sergeant Steins, down a wooded path to the manhole where she claimed Sarah had disposed of part of Adrianne's body. As Sergeant Steins and other officers removed the manhole cover and looked inside with their flashlights, they caught sight of a black trash bag. Sergeant Steins was then lowered into the 8 to 10 foot deep manhole to retrieve this item, and when he did, he could see what appeared to be a charred human hand protruding from the torn plastic, and that is equally horrifying and heartbreaking. And of course, this officer would never forget the gruesome scene that confronted him because it was like something out of a horror movie, but this is real. This is a real person. This is real life. And inside the bag were Adrianne's head and her arms, just like Harley had told them. After midnight, other investigators were at Sarah's residence, and they searched the home and the garage, and they seized a 24-inch long wooden handle with duct tape, a glass container, 2 handsaws, one that was 29 inches long, and another one that was 18 inches long. They also seized a black jacket, gray pants, and a gray and black hoodie. From Sarah's geoprism, they took 4 lighters, a black leather belt, lint from inside the trunk, and on the passenger seat was a hair, and in the glove compartment was a disposable camera. Fabric from the front seats was also taken to test for possible bloodstains. By now, it was around 2 a.m. on Wednesday, January 26th, when Adrianne's parents, Tony and Joanne, got a knock at their front door. And when they opened it up, they saw law enforcement standing on their doorstep and asking to come inside. That's when they knew the news was not going to be good. And my heart breaks for anyone who's had to get news like this. The detectives at first sounded hopeful when they told Tony and Joanne they'd found Adrianne in the park and were going to be making an arrest. But this makes me sad because the couple's world came crushing down just moments later after a long pause filled the air, and they learned that Adrianne was no longer alive. She had been found, but she was found dead. And it was like everything was in slow motion. As horrifying as this was, according to Joanne, police didn't tell the couple that at that point, their daughter had also been dismembered. And I wish they would have, as hard as it would have been for them to hear that in the moment, because the grieving parents were left to learn this detail from a press conference just hours later. Can you even imagine? It was terrible enough that Adrianne had been murdered, but to hear what happened to her afterward almost broke Tony and Joanne, as I'm sure it would do to anyone. Adrianne's birth mother, Carolyn, was just as shattered after hearing that she couldn't even bury Adrianne's complete body because not all of her remains had been found. Around 10:30 a.m., Harley then guided law enforcement, including crime scene investigators John Hatfield and Tom Murchie, to that ravine at Sarah's grandparents' farm. On the property, a blackened heap of ash was evident among the charred sticks, twigs, and melted pieces of the tarp. And as sickening as it was, officers knew they were looking at the spot where Adrianne's body had been burned. This is what was left of that poor girl. 2 halves of her torso and a right leg were recovered from the ravine, along with some badly burned pieces of clothing, including pieces of an orange fabric, and we know that Adrianne was wearing an orange hoodie. I'm almost about to break down thinking about this being someone's child. And I know I've gotten comments like, don't get emotional, but it's hard. This is real and it's sad, and it's actually okay to be emotional. And sadly, there were even signs of animal activity already evident on Adrianne's remains, and her left leg couldn't be located at the time, but her left foot was eventually recovered. Police believed animals had actually carried her leg away. It's really heartbreaking. And at this point, Sarah's geoprism was seized, and that afternoon, Wednesday, January 26th, she was arrested for Adrianne's murder. But she wasn't talking. While Adrianne's remains were sent off for an autopsy, which was conducted the very next day on Thursday, January 27th, in the meanwhile, Sergeant Shekel and his team continue intensively interviewing everyone in Adrianne, Sarah, and Harley's lives. The day after Harley's confession and Adrianne's remains were found, a student from Black Hawk came forward. Her name was Lisa, and she wanted to tell the school principal about a disturbing conversation that she had with Sarah back on Friday, January 21st. She said that Sarah had calmly asked her if you could kill someone by hitting them in the back of the head. And without emotion, Sarah then added that she was going to take this girl to a farm, beat her with a stick, and basically send her to an early grave so that no one would ever see her again. If you hear something like this, tell someone. Because I can't believe Lisa did not report this, but sometimes it may seem like it's just a threat or a thought or a sick joke. And remember, Sarah looks dangerous. Recall people said that she did this often and she was all talk? Well, by now, Harley had also been arrested that very same day. And remember Sarah's boyfriend, Sean? Well, he gave investigators his account of what happened on the day of the murder. He said that once the group had parked at Taco Bell, and this is really sick, that Sarah had asked Adrianne for a hug. And you know Adrianne, as so compassionate and kind as she was, when she went in for that hug, expecting to reconcile with Sarah, instead, Sarah grabbed Adrianne's hair and began yelling at her, and Adrianne was crying. And that's when Sean asked Sarah to stop. And she snapped back at him that if he didn't like it, he could get out. Sean felt like there was going to be a fight and he didn't want to be there, so he claimed he got out of the vehicle and walked to school. Later that evening, Sean said that he called Sarah, but she didn't want to talk to him. And then the very next day, Sarah came to his house and told him she wanted to break up, that she had lost all respect for him because apparently she found out that he told a neighbor about her arguing at Taco Bell with Adrianne. That neighbor actually came forward and passed that information to the police. Sean took a polygraph and he was eliminated as a suspect in this investigation. Then one of Sarah's coworkers came forward and they said they spoke to her the day after the murder. She was jumpy and nervous. Sarah actually told this coworker that she got into a fight with another girl the previous day inside her car and asked if law enforcement would be allowed to search her vehicle. At this point, the coworker responded that if police couldn't find the girl but found evidence in Sarah's car, she was screwed. That's when Sarah explained details of this fight, saying that she knocked the girl's teeth out and then choked her, causing her to spit out blood, and that Harley finished it. I honestly feel like at this point, she was bragging. This coworker had no idea who Sarah was referring to because she never used this girl's name. But I want to switch gears and talk about something unique to Black Hawk's English curriculum. Now, every student was required to keep a journal, which was turned in to the school at the end of each day. Law enforcement pored over the journals of those close to Adrianne, looking for any clue to guide them in a particular direction. They were finally able to read Sarah's journal after one of her friends, Tansy Jensen, turned it over. Now, another friend had given it to Tansy, and that other friend was told by Sarah to dispose of it, but she never did. And it's a good thing, because inside, the investigators found things that revealed an insight into Sarah's psyche. There was a stylized sketch featuring the words, hate, kill, destroy in all caps. In one entry prior to meeting Adrianne, Sarah had written that people didn't keep journals for themselves, they kept journals for other people. She said that the only safe place for your thoughts is in your memory. And in another entry, she wrote that she needed a vacation so she wouldn't hurt anyone or herself. Sarah's journal revealed her plans of asking Adrianne out for lunch, but Sarah had no intention of smoothing things over. In Sarah's entry from Friday, January 21st, the day that Adrianne went missing, Sarah had written about a girl who she was calling Jiffy, and we know who she gave that nickname to. She proceeded to call her a stupid B-word and said the girl needed to back off of Sarah's Kool-Aid. It seems like Sarah really liked to use slang words, ones that I actually haven't heard before used the way that she used them. But Kool-Aid referred to Harley and Sean, apparently. And the entry concluded by saying that she was going to effing kill this girl in question. I think we've seen enough to know exactly what happened. But I want to go back to the autopsy because Adrianne's remains were dismembered and severely charred. It was nearly impossible for the forensic pathologist, Dr. Jessica Bowman, to determine the exact cause of her death at the autopsy. Pieces of the blue tarp had fused to Adrianne's head from the intense heat of this fire, and she still had her earrings on and a bracelet on her right wrist. However, she was missing a necklace that she always wore, and it was later revealed that Sarah had actually stolen it. This was an incredibly challenging autopsy. You're dealing with charred remains, but Adrianne's internal organs and some of her bones were still visible. Due to the extreme heat, her hand muscles had actually contracted and it left her hands in a claw-like position, and 90% of her skin looked like charcoal. But the pathologist was able to determine that Adrianne had sustained 2 blows to the head prior to her death. However, neither one of them were severe enough to be fatal, and the exact cause of death was undetermined. But it was likely caused due to strangulation or smothering. By the time Adrianne's remains had been set on fire, she was actually already dead. And there were no indications of drugs or alcohol in her system, according to her toxicology report. On Sunday, January 30th, a week since Adrianne went missing, over 400 people, including Adrianne's family, friends, and her coworkers, attended her memorial service. The guitar that Adrianne received for Christmas, along with its broken string, was on display among all the flowers, the posters, plastered with Adrianne's pictures. People in attendance were wearing pink ribbons in Adrianne's honor. Meanwhile, there's more to tell you, because this case gets even more convoluted. Someone else came forward to the police with some possibly incriminating and highly disturbing evidence. A woman named Pat Corbin had a really weird feeling in the days following Adrianne's disappearance. She wondered if her 16-year-old grandson, Nathan Gaudette, knew more than he was letting on. He also had a troubled background and a history of drug use. Nathan had moved in with Pat after he was evicted from where he was living. His parents were also divorced. They were still in his life, but he chose to go live with his grandmother. Now, Nathan didn't know Adrianne very well, but he was good friends with Sarah for about the past 2 years. He met her through Harley. They had gone to school together. Pat recalled that on Sunday, January 23rd, Sarah and Harley actually picked Nathan up and they'd gone somewhere, but she had no idea where, but she knew that Nathan was wearing a backpack. Well, that night, when he came back, Pat noticed that Nathan was just sobbing uncontrollably in his room. And she just couldn't push away this nagging feeling that something was up. So on Wednesday, January 26th, after Sarah had been arrested, Pat went down to the basement and she found Nathan's backpack. And inside was her husband's hacksaw. And that's when Pat called the police. They arranged to interview her grandson, Nathan, who denied ever being with Sarah and Harley on the day of the murder. He told investigators he'd seen Sarah that evening when they hung out with some other friends, but she hadn't mentioned anything. Nathan stated that on the afternoon of January 22nd, Sarah did call him. She actually asked Nathan what he would do if he killed someone, as in, how would he dispose of the body? And then she told him, flat out, that she and Harley had killed Adrianne, and she asked Nathan to help them get rid of her remains. Now, Sarah knew Nathan not only had a strong stomach, but a fascination with gore. He was known to be a very sadistic person who liked to kill small animals and then chop them up. Please report that. But Nathan stated that he didn't really believe Sarah and Harley at first. It sounded too crazy to be true, but then he realized they were not kidding. They were absolutely serious. Nathan told the investigators that Sarah was open about the fact that she invited Adrianne to lunch as a plan to get her to go with her so she could kill her. To him, Sarah seemed like she orchestrated the whole plan, but Harley had participated equally in the actual murder. Sarah was the one who told Nathan to dismember Adrianne's body. Nathan said he felt like he was more involved now and he was unable to back out, so he agreed. In his mind, he said he wanted to help Sarah and Harley stay out of jail. But I'm sitting here thinking it's probably impossible to work through that reasoning considering he already knew what Sarah and Harley had done. And again, I don't know how Sarah had so much influence on other people. It's actually scary. It's like these people are under a spell. And Nathan told Sergeant Shekel that on Sunday, January 23rd, Sarah and Harley picked him up and he had his grandfather's hacksaw with him at the time in his backpack. The group then drove to the farm where Nathan proceeded with the unimaginably sickening task of dismembering poor Adrianne's charred remains. He said he removed her legs, which had partially detached in the fire, her arms and her head, and then he sawed her torso in half horizontally before Harley placed the head and arms inside a black trash bag. Are you kidding me? It just seems too crazy to be real. And then Nathan said they took the trash bag with them into Sarah's car and drove to McDonald's for lunch. So they had a little bite to eat after what they did. It's unconscionable. Before driving to the park, where Harley disposed of the bag in the manhole, and then Sarah instructed him to clean the hacksaw and take it back to his grandparents' basement. The investigators were shocked that now a third teen had come forward, admitting to be involved in such a heinous act. On January 31st, Nathan was charged with concealment of a homicide, but because he cooperated and volunteered the information that he did, it was a juvenile charge. The next day, February 1st, Sarah and Harley were both charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in addition to concealment of a homicide, and they both pleaded not guilty and were held on a $1 million bond and would be tried separately as adults. Another memorial service was held for Adrianne, and this time it was on February 5th in Longview, Texas, where she had previously lived with her biological mom, Carolyn, and David. The couple joined 200 people attending the service at Emmanuel Baptist Church. Carolyn wore a pink sweater, and Adrianne's favorite color, and she featured a photo button with a picture of Adrianne on it. At the front of the church was a pink flower arrangement on an altar surrounding a picture of Adrianne in a pink photo frame, 2 pink candles, a pink teddy bear, and a slideshow played, showing happier times in Adrianne's short life, accompanied by the song Friends by Christian artist Michael W. Smith. Adrianne's best friend from Texas, Carlene, spoke during the memorial, and she embraced Carolyn as they both fought back tears. Carolyn then thanked everyone for coming, and Adrianne was cremated. Her ashes were divided between Tony and Carolyn. In Illinois, her ashes were scattered at the Moline Riverside Cemetery next to Tony's sister, who passed away 40 years earlier at just 5.5 weeks old. The remainder of her ashes were sent to Texas, where Carolyn had them buried in an unmarked grave. By now, Adrianne's DNA was found on the hacksaw, and on February 23rd, Nathan pleaded guilty to concealing the homicide. At his sentencing on March 30th, he apologized for his role in disposing of Adrianne's body, but for the Reynolds and the judge, it wasn't enough. Nathan knew where Adrianne was the whole time while her family was worried. He chose not to do the right thing and come forward to relieve their suffering. Judge McLean ultimately sentenced Nathan to a juvenile penalty of 5 years. Law enforcement continued their investigation. They gathered more evidence in preparation for Sarah and Harley's upcoming trials. At this point, a local man named Glenn Roach, who had been having lunch at Taco Bell, came forward, and he told police it was Friday, January 21st, and as he was leaving the restaurant, he noticed a red vehicle in the parking lot rocking back and forth, and a number of people were inside. He thought someone inside was being beaten up, but because the windows were fogged up, he kind of felt like it might be a couple kids fooling around, so he didn't do anything. Sarah's grandmother also came forward. She said on January 21st it was her birthday, and that afternoon, while she was working at the treasure hunt antique store, Sarah and Harley came into the store around 4 p.m., and Mary thought her granddaughter was there to wish her a happy birthday. But then she noticed that Sarah was quiet and fidgety. Sarah's Aunt Della was also there at the time, and she noticed a scratch on Sarah's face, and it was fresh. She asked her how she got it, and Sarah explained that her and Harley were wrestling. We know that's not true. Sarah's sister Elizabeth also told police that in the hours following the murder, she actually helped Sarah hide a few things: a gardening tool, a shovel, as well as Adrianne's necklace. But of course, at the time, Elizabeth didn't know this was Adrianne's necklace. She didn't know Adrianne was missing or anything that had happened. She had no idea that these items were used in a murder. Of course, with all of this happening, the community of East Moline was reeling. Things like this did not happen in their community. Adrianne's friends, as well as those within Sarah, Harley, and Nathan's circles, were shocked. They were in disbelief about what they were hearing. It was just too extreme to even contemplate it being true. Students who heard Sarah making threats in relation to Adrianne thought that she was all talk and only joking, but many of them felt that Harley could have stopped what was happening and chose not to, which was exactly what I mentioned earlier. And I know you will give me your thoughts in the comments, and I will read them, because even if Harley had no idea about what was going to unfold in that car, she had the choice to stop Sarah from attacking Adrianne, but instead, she turned on her friend. And she played a role in this murder. No one could understand how something like this could happen, let alone be committed by two teenagers. And it led many people to wonder, who were Sarah and Harley anyway underneath it all? So I want to take a moment to tell you. Maybe this will provide a little bit of insight. Sarah Ann Cole was born April 23rd, 1988. She had grown up in East Moline and spent her childhood on her grandparents' farm. Her father, Tom, was actually a police officer, but Sarah's parents divorced when she was only 8 years old and the family was living in Idaho at the time. Sarah didn't have much contact with her dad after her mom moved them to Illinois, and she didn't really get along with her mom either. She originally attended Rock Island High School, but due to anger issues and behavioral problems, self-harm, alcohol and drug abuse, she was enrolled at Black Hawk in December of 2003, and she managed to stay out of trouble with the law. She only had a traffic citation by the time of her arrest. And we know when Adrianne arrived, Sarah took an instant interest in the new girl. But apparently Sarah's friends knew that her intentions were not pure. Sarah liked being a leader. She wanted to mold Adrianne into someone who followed her around and did whatever she wanted. Kind of more like a cult leader. And by this time, Harley was also on the scene. Harley was born November 2nd, 1987. Her parents also divorced when she was only 8 years old, and she and her younger brother mainly lived with their dad. Harley had a history of marijuana, cocaine, and ecstasy abuse and began drinking alcohol at only age 14. She never had any behavioral or academic issues, and she loved playing sports, but she really struggled socially. Then she began hanging out with Sarah, and Harley's mom, Teresa, noticed a change in her personality. Harley became withdrawn from her friends and family, and Teresa really felt that Sarah was a bad influence and very controlling. And Harley seemed totally obsessed with Sarah and was very happy to just follow her around no matter how toxic the dynamic was. But now let's jump back to the trial. While the death penalty no longer exists in Illinois, it was in place back in 2005, and even though both Sarah and Harley were being tried as adults, the prosecution announced they wouldn't be pursuing the death penalty because the killers were minors when the murder occurred. But if they were convicted, they would be sentenced to up to 60 years in prison. 17-year-old Sarah's trial got underway October 31st, 2005 at the Rock Island County Courthouse before Judge James Terros. Now, the prosecution theory of the case, let's go there. They believed that on January 21st, despite all the bad blood between them, Adrianne couldn't believe it when Sarah reached out to her and asked her to go to lunch. Adrianne was excited. She hoped the girls could call a truce and put everything behind them. But when they arrived at that Taco Bell parking lot, things changed. Sarah then started accusing Adrianne of being promiscuous. And then she and Harley both attacked Adrianne together, with one of them striking her in the head with a stick. The young girl was choked to death before Sarah and Harley drove out to Sarah's grandparents' farm, where they attempted to dispose of her body by setting it on fire. Sarah and Harley didn't realize that it's not like what you see on TV or in the movies. A human body doesn't just disintegrate, and they didn't think they were going to get caught. But that's when they realized they were over their head, and when it came to a motive, prosecutors argued that Sarah was angry about Adrianne's possible romantic interest in her boyfriend Sean, as well as hooking up with those other boys, and her friendship with Harley. They said that Sarah was consumed by jealousy and annoyed by Adrianne's constant pleading to be friends. And Sarah was also furious that she was no longer at the top of the popularity pyramid at school. So she decided she was going to teach Adrianne a lesson. Not only that, she also wanted to send a strong message to Harley about who really ran things in their friendship, which is why she invited Harley along in the car. There was nothing to suggest that Sarah ever had any form of mental impairment. Harley didn't testify against Sarah, but Nathan did. He was the prosecution's star witness. Even though the defense challenged his integrity, they claimed that he was lying in order to secure a plea deal. The defense's case, are you ready for this? I'm going to tell you what they argued. It was that Sarah was completely blameless and innocent, and that Harley had been responsible for the entire thing. Wow. It's like they didn't even try to work on a real defense. All they did is completely flip Harley's narrative. The defense argued it was Sarah who was afraid of Harley, not the other way around. The defense called 5 witnesses, including Sarah's family, friends, and other people who spoke on her behalf. They testified that Sarah was the one that was bullied. She was a supportive friend and a good student, and she suffered from being treated badly by her peers and her family, and she had a very difficult relationship with her mother. So they're totally placing her in the victim's role. And guess what? It's not a surprise to me. Sarah also took the stand in her own defense. She testified that on January 21st, she picked up Harley and her boyfriend Sean and drove to school. When they arrived, it was then that she started hearing rumors that she was going to beat up Adrianne. Then she later said she heard Adrianne wanted to be with her boyfriend Sean. So she admitted to feeling pretty angry. And that's why she wrote in her journal that she wanted to kill Adrianne. This sounds really, far-fetched, maybe? Sarah then told the court that she extended the lunch invitation to Adrianne because Adrianne approached her crying, saying she had no friends. Sarah said she still didn't like Adrianne, but she felt bad for her, so she had her come along. Sarah laid out her version of what happened next. She said in the car, she confronted Adrianne over pursuing Sean and being intimate with other boys, and she grabbed Adrianne's hair, telling her to stay away from them. But Sarah claimed she backed off when Adrianne curled up in the fetal position and started crying. Sarah said it was Harley that started choking Adrianne from behind without warning, forcing her into the back seat. Sarah testified that Adrianne was unable to escape from Harley, who had her across her lap, beating her with a stick and pressing it up against her throat. According to Sarah's version, she told Harley to stop, and that's when Harley struck her in the face with that stick and broke her nose. Harley was hysterical. The next thing Sarah knew, Harley told her that Adrianne was dead. And she testified that she saw Harley wrap her belt around Adrianne's neck to make sure she was dead and then covered her with a coat. Sarah testified she was in shock at what happened, and she denied strangling Adrianne. Sarah told the court that following Harley's instructions, that's why she did everything else. Drove back home, didn't speak about anything because she just saw someone kill someone. Later, she said that Harley apparently instructed Sarah to drive out to her grandparents' farm, and that's where Harley wrapped Adrianne's body in a tarp, doused her with gasoline, and set her on fire. Sarah said she couldn't even bear to watch, but Harley was threatening to kill her, her family, and her cats if she told anyone. She claimed that dismembering Adrianne's body was all Harley's idea. Isn't this convenient that everything is someone else's idea? On cross-examination, Sarah told the court that the witnesses who testified against her were all wrong and had fabricated their evidence. So essentially, everyone's lying except for Sarah. And during her time on the stand, this girl had an air of defiance about her. She was openly so rude, and she responded to questions with more questions. It's like she wanted to run the show, and the trial was her stage. The jury retired to deliberate. After 15 hours, there was an outcome, but no verdict. It was a hung jury on all charges. 11 jurors thought Sarah was guilty, but the foreman was holding out. This lone juror didn't feel that Sarah wasn't responsible, but they just weren't convinced that the state had proven that she was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. On November 16th, a mistrial was declared, and this was devastating to all of Adrianne's loved ones. Now they had to sit through this all over again. That is a major setback. On February 6, 2006, Sarah's second trial began, and this time it was 60 miles away. They got a venue change due to the extensive media coverage. This time, the prosecution went with a little bit of a different argument because maybe they were worried about proving that she murdered Adrianne beyond a reasonable doubt. They told the court that even though Sarah may not have actually killed Adrianne, she was responsible as the orchestrator. She initiated the confrontation in the car and escalated the situation by beating and choking Adrianne before Harley, in Sarah's words, finished her off. Again, Nathan testified for the prosecution. But unlike her first trial, Sarah decided not to take the stand, which was probably a good thing, and the defense rested without calling not even one witness. This time around, when it came to jury deliberations, the process was much smoother. It only took 10 hours and they reached a verdict. On February 22nd, Sarah was found guilty on all charges. And I agree with that verdict. Harley's trial had also been moved for publicity reasons, but instead of it even happening on April 27th, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and concealment of a homicidal death. She got a plea deal, and this was made because they believed that had Harley not confessed, there was a strong possibility that Adrianne's remains would have never been found. Instead of the 60-year maximum sentence permitted under the law, the state agreed to seek a maximum of only 40 years for the murder. Harley was ultimately sentenced to 40 years for the murder conviction and then an extra 5 years for concealment. So there was a total of 45 years behind bars, which was the maximum. The court determined that Harley did have a long history of drug use, and it had led to a general impaired judgment. She also had no prior criminal records. They took that into account. And she did demonstrate genuine remorse. Despite Harley's apology, she actually later denied killing Adrianne, claiming all she did was loosely hold the belt up after Adrianne was dead and Sarah placed it around Adrianne's neck. Before I wrap up, let's get back to Sarah for one moment because she was next to learn her fate at the sentencing 7 weeks later on August 29th. Tony and Joanne gave very moving victim impact statements. Joanne spoke of how she was still unable to sleep or enjoy anything in her life anymore. Joanne couldn't stop thinking about the horror that Adrianne had experienced. In Joanne's eyes, Sarah had given the death penalty to someone who only wanted to be her friend. Tony told the court how Adrianne's life had started to turn around when she got to East Moline. For the first time in a long time, Adrianne seemed happy. Tony never let an opportunity go by for him to tell his daughter how much he loved her, and he said her smile made him feel complete. For Tony, Sarah had taken everything away from him, and her punishment should be no less than the maximum. Then it was Sarah's turn to address the court. She expressed remorse, but she never admitted to the murder. She said she was so good at not feeling anything in her life that she felt nothing as Adrianne died. Judge Taros told Sarah that she didn't care about anything following the murder. All she cared about was covering her tracks. She was cold and callous and was never going to change. In the end, Sarah received 48 years imprisonment with 3 years of mandatory supervised release on a first-degree murder charge plus 5 years for the concealment of a homicidal death. And this was to be served consecutively. This totaled 53 years in prison. Of course, Sarah filed a motion for her sentence to be reconsidered, but it was denied, and I'm glad. And this wasn't the last time she tried to appeal and do all kinds of things. None of them worked, luckily. In the wake of Adrianne's death, Tony and Joanne established a memorial fund in her name because they wanted to raise awareness within schools and families to implement programs and initiatives to prevent teenagers from bullying each other and violence. I want to tell you something that happened in the aftermath of all of this. On April 16, 2012, then 23-year-old Nathan died in a single-vehicle car crash out in Indiana, along with 2 other people. His Chevy had been traveling along South Victor Pike in Monroe County when the driver lost control and struck a tree. It's very tragic, but you know what? I'm sure some people would say it also could be karma. I'll let you decide. Today, 36-year-old Sarah continues to reside at the Logan Correctional Center in Illinois, and according to prison records, by the time she would become eligible for parole, it would be 2053, and she would be 64 years old. Harley is also 36 years old, and she resides at Pontiac Correctional Center in Illinois. She will become eligible for parole in 2047 at the age of 59. Adrianne is the one who truly matters, and the one who tragically is no longer with us because Sarah was too insecure and jealous to deal with rejection, and she wanted to have power over people, and she felt like if she couldn't control them, she had to get rid of them. But another reason that Adrianne is no longer here is because the one person who we know could have intervened to save her, Harley, made a different choice. A cowardly choice that took the path of least resistance. I don't want Adrianne to be remembered for what Sarah, Harley, and Nathan did to her. That's not what Adrianne's memory means to so many people who loved her, including her family, and especially Tony and Joanne. They stepped up. They provided her a safe and loving home. Adrianne was headed in the right direction. She had her whole life ahead of her. For someone who had already overcome so much in her short life and was putting in the hard work to get back on track, this makes Adrianne's loss even more senseless. Her spirited personality, her eagerness to make friends and connect with people on a genuine level, and the determination to make something of herself are the traits I want you to remember her for, and what her loved ones will never forget. Tony keeps a photo of his daughter in his vintage Mustang, a 1966 model that replaced the car that Adrianne loves so much. Her spirit also lives on in Tony's poetry. In closing, I'd like you to stay and listen to Tony's words in a poem that he wrote to remember his daughter. Quote, "You played the hand you were dealt. Even though it wasn't good, you held onto it and you did the best you could. You were dealt to be my daughter. I was dealt to be your dad. No matter how the game turned out, you're the best hand I ever had." The story has been completely unbelievable and heartbreaking, and I thank you so very much for being here today for Adrianne's story. Please share this with someone you think needs to hear it. I will see you in my next video. Bye.